Provision lines of modem, line direct signals of satellites and towers and lines of communications of Tango, Foxtrot, Corsair, line communications of Galaxy, Syria, directing lines in Rainbow, line communications setting into Oscar November. Calculate the modifying lines of Papa uniform. Communicates the settings of travel points lines of communications to its system, all three calculations. We have to understand how to direct and redirect our lines of travel. And the only way we can get into that position location is to truly understand how to see it through the astral projections of ourselves. Set lines of modification. Set lines of travel. Let's get at direct lines. Okay. Core center line communications, ground centers, in communication system. Okay. Going through a line screen into a dimensional door. Okay. Now, this is what is in travel. Set position. This is the astral self. Okay. That's the astral self, right? That's the door, right? Modification lines, temperature readings, core setting, line communication setting, all levels of operation inside a classification system, all through line set locations into perimeters and track location to primates. The second track location. It's very confusing in set position. Now, you are in position, right? You go first. Okay, this is your astral self traveling into its dimension. Okay, now this is your body coming in next. Okay, that's how it works. Right? So you come first, your astral self, which is the colorations of rainbows. Starting with the ground line, sets that positional levels. Black is, of course, center lines of space. And then you come to security line defense, over cross locations and directions. Start with that line. That you simulate in the core centers line, your 12 measure, sets communication setting calculation modify into blue, over lines, override, over sequence, and defaults, and screen adaptation, right? Then you go into position locations into cloak and dagger. Okay, you go into 3 lines of channels into waveline screen adaptations to setting, right? Then you can add colorations around the system, all right? But it's 12 line communications. Okay, 144. Right? And we're just going to gold, right? So the synchronization system, now you have 12 foundations, but you don't have to use all colors because your behavioral system is constantly changing in measure and scale and balance and frequencies, all through metaphors, right? So you come first, right? And then your body comes. So your astral self comes first before anything else, but it comes together in a synchronization at timelines of sequence. The existing of its operation system puts all levels of you, how you see the grounds, the powers, the ambulances, the modems, the Wi-Fi, satellites, and the towers. So it's very important to understand these things. Wherever you go, right? In position locations, you have to have data, right? You have data, you can bring that anywhere, right? It's in process communications, but your mind has to be balanced with your phones, or your Wi-Fi just doesn't work, the modem. You come into interference, you come into India, you come into Quebec. You have to reset Galaxy, Syria lines all levels of Foxtrot, core center line position location system, Oscar November, line connection setting, and Juliet, core center interference of India, track the lines communication setting into Papa back into uniform. So it's a line communication setting to travel. Set position location and system location, right? You're always connected to you, synchronized in setting. Sets position lines of attractions and direct signals modifications. Now, once you understand the synchronization, you come together at set position, right? So let's go core centers in gold, sync lines of settings, a 3-track location, right? And overline signals. So I'm only using gold line signals. I'm not using a foundation of 12. I'm just using gold, right? So I synchronize myself in 3-line division location of system and travel. Gold is the highest information locations that you can use in communications through frequency. Gold is the highest. It's the realms of the angelics. Now, understanding that position location of perspective sets lines of communication. Ground center lines of 1. Okay, let's go through black service lines of core centers, lines of travel, point lines of settings, and 3 lines of measure, 3 core centers of travel communications. Directing signal lines of modification lines of 2 overtractions into an energetic dome. Location grid. Line grounds, high center interference and line set location setting and measure and scale communication to its system all through travel. Directing line screen adaptation, process lines over cross location screens in position or location setting into the magnetic highway of information. Information coming from you. Okay, seconds on channel, minutes on hour, and hours on seconds. See? I can change an information system. Doesn't have to be seconds, minutes, and hours. I could just work with seconds. I can just work with the minutes, or I could just work with the hours. Or I could work with all three. I'm in control. I'm in command. Okay? So you have to truly understand how to use the ground lines. You always have to have a ground. You always have to have power. And you always have to have an atmosphere. Okay? That's inedible. That you can't get rid of. Its locations are remembering the intelligence of its direction or where it's going. You're following one indication, goes to all indication all at once through pi and track location. Okay? And again, you can change it in information lines of grounds set position by seeing on 4 lines at different angles. Right? Always see it on different lines of placements and screen lines adaptation. Okay? So it's a constant rotation, 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 right? Synchronized setting lines, 6 lines of travel, and line rotation, surface, and set position of formula, and track location to a system. All through calculation modifications, you bring it up, bring it in, and set position. There's the tracker, there's the inventory, there's the flow, right? Goal line cycles, course centers of blue dots, sets lines of travel, endpoint lines of setting, and position location to a system, all through plasma. Directing signals, modification lines of red. Red indicates position lines as all communication system. So you can change core lines and foundation graph lines at 3 triangulation line position of programs. Directing lines modification change the core centers of traffic inventory. Directing lines of core centers come into green. Green lines across location system over lines of measure. Scales of communication ground centers in position lines of interlines intersections over lines communication setting into processing. Directing lines and traffic inventory flow changes the course of communication. Okay? And then you bring it really in set position. Okay? Understand how this all works, right? All right, so you got spectrums of right and spectrums of blue, right? Position lines of attractions on direct signals. Let's bring in cloak and dagger. Over line, over cross. Different colors, different lights. Let's bring it in. A higher line setting. Oh, look at that. Whoa. Illumination grounds, illumination graphs, set position, communication. Now it's communicating with you guys, every single one of you. See? It's communicating with you guys because it's bringing in its setting. It's coming out of its spectrum. Okay? You bring it in more. And then you bring it in more. Then you see the colorations of the rainbow. See? See all the colorations? Now by bringing in more and more, right? You can see the face recognition. Okay? See the communication? Different levels of cycles, right? So I'm just showing you how powerful light is and what it can do through the line screen. Also with blue, it's a position, right? Bring it in more lines of communications, right? Start to see the face come in interactions, directing lines modification. So you have to start how to indicate this lines, puts all lines of communication setting to processing. Flux over line, directing lines of 1 over tractions over 3 lines of measure, 3 scales, 2 tractions, into 1 cycle. Okay? Getting into modifications and alteration, mind lines, conception over screen, and 3 lines of communication. Directing lines of flux over line screen adaptations and settings. Traffic point lines of graph, center core system of grounds, power line generation screen lines adaptations, process lines into platitude. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 line cycles, 3 lines of communication. Right? Directing lines of signals into location grid over cross location of signal. Set lines of rainbow track location over cross location of setting. Process communication ground centers into planet surface, into longitude and latitude of bandwidth over screen adaptations, and line screen adaptations of astral projections and travel. Okay? Setting communication grounds over cross location to a setting and travel. See, I'm showing you in a 4-line different angle how you see things in provision. And you bring it in, all through traction. Okay? So the more you do this, the more it gets easier through traffic inventories and how to put in line direction significations. Know exactly where the XT1000s are coming in line direct signals of modification, all through travel. Right? And you bring it in. Okay, communicate with it. Understand the interlining, interlacing, interconnection settings of travel in all communications to a system. calculates and modifies all lines of travel and communication. All right? Perspective, projection. Bringing in color lights, red line screen, adaptation lines of surface and track location. Directing in modification ground centers, line condition setting, location settings of attraction. Directing lines, modification ground center, lines of 3-line rotation surface, location default. 3 triangulate line communication to its position locations. Let's go into the green. Green cycles in 1 center, 1 travel, 1 point lines of graph, and set position to its operation. 3 lines of angles, 3 cross location lines of orange. Fibonacci lines of 1 way, sets position. Fibonacci lines another way, and set position lines of travel. Communicate ground centers and Fibonacci line circle, and line rotation surface and traction. Okay? And again, split it on lines of anomaly and track location. Okay? Always do it on a 4-line angle. Okay, it's very powerful. And then you bring it in through its equation. Okay? So you find a way that every comes into its own system of its own platform of communication. Okay? So everything has its own space, modulation, setting, screen adaptation. See the lights? Traffic lights and towers of communication. Right? Towers come in. There it is. Okay? So the more you bring things in close, the more you come into the reality of your simulation. Right? It gets much easier to send location to green, change the colors, change the attractions, change the lights, change the spectrums, set position. See? It's amazing, right? So getting in that communication setting has fault mechanisms. Now, fault line is lines of a crevice communication, screen lines adaptation, the flux that allocates time frame, location, your stargates and portals. It sets measures and scales of communication system all through plasma line screens. Directing lines of modification centers puts all communications ground center line connection setting to a triangulation split lines of anomaly. That process communication system all through line calculation setting, tablets, course centers, lines of travel, point lines of graph, and communication setting as center of communication surface interaction. Okay? There's always going to be grounds, powers, and the atmospheres. Okay, you have to understand how to communicate to higher levels of platforms and communication setting into your alteration screen lines adaptation. Process lines of 1. Okay, so the reason why I keep doing it on a 4-line angle is you got to see it on 4 lines of communications. Never see it indications of 1. Okay, all see it in all volume of face recognition. See the face? Okay, everything has a face. Pattern recognition lines, anything through metaphor. Triangulate line communication is a formula. 2 over lines, so equals lines of 1. Equals with core lines that executes, set core centers, and line communication setting into 2-dot screen. Set a CPU unit. Set a coordinate line connection setting. Record. Calculate, modify, and line signals and position lines of travels. Point lines is 3 zeros in travel. Point lines is setting. Process calculations green lines. Calculation modify lines 0. Position of 0. 3 lines of 0. Travel point lines of graph and set position lines of communication. Directing lines modification ground centers, 1 position of 2, 2 positions of 4, 4 position lines of 6 in travel. Sets communication grounds, inhibitors of our line into primary circuits in set position. Process lines, directing lines of modification, ground centers, line communication setting to travel. Directing in modification lines, astral projections, astral travels, and position of the pyramid, inside the pyramid. Okay? So there's the ground center lines of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. Process lines of 1 and over lines of screen adaptation, crossing line signals adaptation. Process calculation lines of CPU, recording line screen adaptation setting, opens all levels, indicate position lines of program and calculation. Directing in modification ground centers, platforms of 1, 2, and 3 in travel. Sets communication ground centers, lines of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 operation line connection center, energetic dome screen adaptation. Process communication ground centers, opens all communication setting to travel. Lights and communications comes into travel communications, all through processing. So it's important you understand what's going on through calculations, all right, through mechanisms. So that's why I keep doing it on a 4-line angle. And set position, right? It gets much easier how to use it through attractions. Okay, all this is done through alteration, right? I'm alterating the metaphors, the coloration, the patterns, the lights, the attractions, and the formulas and the equations. Putting everything into formation lines of grounds and set positions, calculations, all through setting. Okay? All right, directing in modification grounds, symbolism, back attractions. Adding equation line screen, process lines of 1, asterisk self, process lines of 2, Astra South, process lines of 3. 3 different colors of coloration line screens of me and track location. That's 3 different levels of me. 3 different lines of dimension lines of scale. Getting communication grounds is a particle line of acceleration that line screen adaptation through energetic domes. 1, 2, and 3 lines of measure and scale. Process line calculation setting, ground lines of communication setting. Travel mechanism line screen adaptations. Change communication grounds, sets communications here, and set position locations all levels. Sets communication lines of red over cross location system, all through platform of C and track location. Directing lines of set lines of highest interference into all communication setting, into levels, into the central setting of 0 gravity in set position. Okay? So it's very powerful how you come into the emotional line attractions and set position to your operations, your modems of interfacing, interconnection, interlacing, line connection setting. The more you see yourself as a perspective of self, of the astral projections of self, you understand the self-development of self, modification of knowing thyself. Putting that in communication setting puts all levels of you in volume, right? Vast, velocity, and vacuum. But it's true understanding the measure and the scales of what you can do through formula and set position, all through attractions, all through your binary, all through your algorithms, all right? So the alteration is like mind shifting the mind line into coloration lines of patterns. Let's go through black, data file lines of 1, and position of over cross locations, data file lines of 3. Setting cross line symbols, setting lines of 2 lines of measure. Now the scale lines of balance can allocate position time communications. Directing lines and settings, process lines of 1 and position of 2. 2 lines of 3 and 3 sets communication centers into line position location of 1 cycle and 1 center. Setting point lines of graph into position of 2 over 1. Process lines of 0 over lines of 2 and position lines of 3 equals lines of core lines of box and travel endpoint lines of communication. Directing lines of indication crosses lines into time measure and scale communication. Calculate and modify ground center lines of 1 over cross lines center lines of communication system and travel. Directing in calculation ground centers in line communication setting. Process lines equal lines of core lines at 3 lines of 0, box lines of core system, and travel communication. Again, always get in position locations on a 4-line angle all at once. Okay, you have to really focus on these guys. Okay, never see it on a flat surface. Okay, sending cross-line signals, cross locations, overline signal position operation to its surface. Now we bring in laser attractions that sets lines of code lines. Directing lines of code configuration, reconfiguration setting, recoding inline communication to its setting. Process calculation of ground centers into 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division. Sets core centers into all communication setting in laser track location. Bringing it through equations, opens through signal. Ground centers, open line modifications, and ground centers, line communication system, all through travel mechanisms, through pi. Center core line direct signals. Core lines to calculation lines into green line cycles and set position calculations. Changing lines of course, retracting line communication in gold in sequence. Sending communication lines, fluctuation line screen adaptations, a process of communication. Okay, illuminate the grass. Light comes in, attractions, sets position, locations. Oh, you can see illuminating. See it's illuminating by itself? It's in its time measure. It's existing right now. It's not a picture frame. It's with you, existing with you. The only difference is it's in its own space, in its own time, that governs its own system. That brings you in through calculations, right? So it's very powerful when you see it through an expansion. Right? Modification lines, there's the sun. Okay? And the moon is set position lines of design line. Core centers lines of track over lines of communication of its sun over the moon. Comes a light round line communication setting over cross locations into red. Bringing in cycle lines, high center interference to travel. Sets communication grounds, coloration lines, change all communication setting back in set position. Coloration lines is green. Change communication left directions over cross location system, over line settings back in track location. Okay? That's why I keep bringing it in, because once you bring it in, you're basically bringing in the projection, how you see things, and provision through your traffic, your inventories, and your binaries, and your transistors, your resistors, and light switches. All right, so let's get into the light switches now. which is your line communication setting, to your interspectrums, your modems, your satellites, your towers, your core centers, your travel position lines of communication system, all through measure. Scales communication lines of indications, process lines of 1 over lines of 0, process lines of 2. Okay, our computer lines of calculations, alpha, delta, theta. Okay, sets core lines highest interference and position location 2 over lines of 0, set position of 0 over lines of 0, and position lines of 3 in track location. Directing lines, modification lines into beta, communication lines equals lines at alpha, alpha equals location of delta, line condition setting. Process lines at theta, theta opens up signals into box frame, main frame, track frame, directing frame, communication frame, and track location system all through travel. Okay? But always see it in a form of line communication to its system. Now, what do we have in track lines of communication setting? A dolphin. Hoo-ah. Okay, people? So it's basically understanding how you start recognizing all communication systems, location of your formulas. It sets equation lines and water containment screen lines all through a dolphin in communication to its formula, through its equation. Center core line condition setting, all lines of sequence and track location. Okay? There it is. There's a dolphin. It's a dolphin. All right. Now, if you look at it on this angle, in set position, what do you see in tractions? What do you see in tractions? What do you see? You got to go beyond the mind, imagination lines, or the core lines and direct signals modifications. You see intelligence, right? Looking down, right? Let's get in process core centers. There's the neck and track location, right? Now, if I do this again in set position, what do we have in track location? Right? A little fish. Okay? And what's this? Oh my gosh, looks like a bird. You see it? See the bird? It's amazing, right? And you put it back in position in locations where we got in positions up in set calculations, right? Dolphin communicating with its young. We're right here. Okay? Coming out of the water sequence. There we are in line communication setting to travel. Okay, people? So the more you have fun with it, the more it gets easier through formula equations, and the more it indicates your system through value, volume, and then you put your lines adaptation to line calculation setting to interconnection, interlacing, interline division. Now, interline division is basically line crossing signals. So if you get a cross-line communication, process lines of time measure, scales of balance line communication of center, position of grounds, in the atmosphere line screen adaptations of process lines communication. And again, you start with this line communications, always on a 4-line angle. So it's a continuous, okay, and a line screen adaptations of a process communications of setting all through calculation, all right? So I've just shown you the examples, how powerful it is to recognize these things all through instructions. How you come into that all through equation and track locations, right? All through a dolphin. All right? All through formula, all through equation. So the more you have fun with it, the more it gets easier. Truth narratives and 3 lines of communications of processing. A, set lines of Z over 1. Okay? So what you're doing now is you're creating an inventory. The faster you create the volume, right? Create this, and this comes in. Create this over across locations. So out with the old, in with the new, out with the old, in with the new, with inventory. Anything through data, anything through intel, anything through intelligence, information locations of processing, data processing, operation processing, correlations of processing, CPU of processing. Everything is a data processing of you through programs, of UR, of programs. So how to understand how to direct that in cycles gets a communication setting. 1 ground center lines of 0, A lines of track location lines of A, and Z formation lines of set position. All levels into O over lines and position lines of setting. Z line core line centers into S, position lines of A track, lines of B, equals lines of E over C, and C lines of set position of travel. Okay? Now, if you get really close in line communication setting, all through operations to a system, what do you see? What do you see? What do you see? A frog, ribbit. See a frog. Now, if I lace the lines and travel point lines of graph and eight positions and put it back in instructions, what do you see in position location to its system now? It's using its mouth. I didn't do it, did it on its own. Right? So I'm just showing you, the more you get into that position, the more you have fun with it through attractions and direct signals and modification. Okay? Coming into scale, coming into balance, coming to formation lines, your phenomenal line rotations is your primers. Now you're reaching those levels of line alteration system. Line alterate line screen adaptations of 2 doors in cycle. Set position of 1 over 2 and 3 tractions. 2 doors, right? Now there's 3 central lines in set position to its operation. All right? Directing in modification ground standards lines communication setting. Open sequence of panel in set position to its locations. Okay? Set course centers of 0 in operation surface and track location. All right? Directing lines of 6 and 9, course centers lines of travel, and measure, scale, and communication to its system. See the light tractions? Let's bring that in, shall we? Okay, let's bring that in more. Okay. Now, what do you see through light traction? What do you see through light traction? Right? Look beyond. What do you see? What do you see? Okay? What do you see? A reptilian. See the eyes? There's the reptilian. Okay? So you have to understand that everything is light. It's the projections of light. There's no back, there's no forward, there's no up, there's no down. There's no cross angles of anything. But it's all levels in how you see all lines of communications, all through light interactions, all through its reptilian. See it? It's all through light. So it's just a scale, you know, it's just trying to understand how to see it through formula equations. And the more you internal lines of communication system, yeah, the TV box, circuitry line screen adaptation on one surface, one track location, right? So it doesn't matter how you look at it, it's always an information location and changing frequencies. Changing frequencies, right? Different angles, different projections, and all calculation system, right? Now you cross that, okay? It doesn't matter how you look at it, the frequencies are constantly changing in set position, but you're in 4 lines of different angles, right? Now it gets more complicated when you add more complication system to its drawing and traction, because now you see it in all different lines of formations, circulation, rotations, all right? So, and then you bring it in set position, all right? Now when you bring it in, you can really, really see it, okay? See it's in operation. Oh, calculation line is high center locations, R2D2. So I'm just showing you how powerful you can see through light interactions and direct signals. And then you bring it in more. Right? It doesn't need to create its anomaly. It's already set through its finger points, its direct lines of modification to its indication system, all through travel. And it doesn't matter how you bring it in set position. You can change the formation grounds. All right? Change the communication setting, open all signals in calculation. Right? But now you're dealing with lights. So look, see? What do you see? What do you see? Look through the light. Right? 2 birds, side to side. One looking one way, the other one looking the other way. Whoa. So we all understand how to go through the light, a projection, and see on different angles. See through the lens of your glasses above or below, or lines of communication of center communication setting, looking, tracking in this way, because you're constantly looking in the existence of its lens itself through holographic setting of a stream. Sets communication ground lines, of coloration lines, and high position location to its system. Red lines of cycle and 4 lines of communication. Start with attractions, right? And then we go through this locations, right? And then we change the direction. And then we change the direction. You can't see it, right? Oh, it's coming in. Right? You see it. I can't see it. You see it. Can't see it, right? So it's constantly traveling. right? You see it, right? Because you're bringing it in closer, 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 closer. The more you bring it in closer, the more you see it. The more you get in positions, you can't see it, right? It comes in track locations and settings, right? All through coloration. So it doesn't need modification, grounds, powers, and atmospheres because it's already had this collocation to its awareness and travel in position of this formula. Directing lines of symbolism, box line frames, travel point lines of graph, and 3 central communication setting to travel. Process line over cross locations over defaults and line communication lines of travel. Directing lines course centers of center line communication astral projections and line screen adaptation of processing and track location. Remember, see it in all different angles in line communication. Okay? Getting into that position. Okay? Look at that. Oh. Okay. You bring it in. Right? So when you bring it in, you're actually bringing in more conscious awareness of what you're looking at a deeper core. The deeper core is this. Okay? Not this of what you see. Okay? Is this what you see? Okay? So that's how it comes into projections in all settings. All right? Process lines of 1. Now we can get lines of course centers of A track, directing lines of B, set position of DX, and position lines of C and track location. Right? Now it's in formula. Now I'm adding the equation. Now I'm adding frames. So now I'm taking it out of its intelligence and taking out what it governs its system all through light interactions. So I'm in control in set position locations. I'm adding an A track to a C track to a DX lines of setting. Process calculates the ground centers and line screen adaptation of surface and track location. Bring it over a communication setting. This is what it looks like all through line calculation setting to its galaxy and position of its planet. Whoa! What do we have in tractions here? What do we have in tractions? Okay? So the more you connect, the more understand your sequence and line screen adaptation. What do we have? What do we have? The USSR. Ooh. Dun, dun, dun. Star Trek. Look. Okay? Without thinking. Without thinking. Okay? Coming in this system location. Look at this. What is this? What is that? What is it? The satellite. All right. Bringing course centers, lines of track location in the opposite cycles and line screen adaptation and process communication to a system all through 3 angles and track location. There it is in line position. Okay? So it gets much easier when you see it on always and 4 lines of grounds in set position. All through travel. All through mechanisms. All through formula. Right? That's why I wanted you guys to get into your puzzles. So you get into 4 corners. Let's get into a 4-corner screen and direct signals and modification. And you work your way in. You work your way in. Okay? And then you create the puzzle and track location. That's how it's done. And then you can travel through the angles and always in forms of indication to all levels of arrows of indication settings. All communications, all lines of communication have existing all at once in set position of expansion. Your evolution, set calculations. Okay? And then again, you can see the intelligence. There it is. There's the intelligence. Inside position of center. I can do the same thing again in set position location of center. Okay? Now I can bring it in, 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 closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. It's just coming into expansion. But to really see the deeper core is to really, really bring it in. And always in forms. See? There's a platform right here in track location. Right? There's always platforms that you look at. How you describe that is how you see it. Right? Through its traffic or through its inventory and set calculations. Right? See straight lines. It's not a straight line. Nothing is a straight line. Nothing formulates through a straight line in track locations. Not through symbolisms or anything line communication. Okay? All through platform. See illuminating? See, it's going to get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. Right? Oh, we got there. See? Didn't see it, did you? Because it's a higher frequency. Right? You can't see it, so it's protecting its own system until it comes in. And when it comes into a different screen line, different lines of communication. And then it disappears, like the sun and the moon does in that position. So it's not hiding, it's just changing a frequency. All right, so when the sun goes down, basically the sun and the moon go down together, right? So it gets in provision in set position, all timelines all at once. It changes the scales, it changes the balance, it changes the measure of where you are in your frequency. You are in control, what you bring in and what you don't bring in. And how you bring these things in is all through frequency in set position. Okay? So I'm just telling you exactly what happens in that position locations when you bring these things in. Okay? So it just overcasts set positions. Okay? And you just, everything that you see in platform. Okay? The more you bring it in, the more you see the deeper core of everything in travel. You can't see it until you see it come in, right? See? See how it comes in? See it's traveling? Now, if I keep bringing it in, you can actually see it more, right? But it's the optical illusion how you see that, right? That's a 27,000 line sky interference, a direct lines of modification to its own satellite. Sets modem lines of Wi-Fi's and modem lines of high core centers. It's got 2 million dimensional door screens. It's got to allocate position and time frame. And it has a code signals in seconds, lines of course interference of 4 flux location settings to travel, all through set position. All through modification, change lines, direct signals. It hasn't left, it's still there, just at a higher frequency in set position. Okay? So it's very powerful when coming in that directions. All right? So we're going to stop there and travel. Okay? Setting lines of communication system, all through calculation settings. All right? Get you in modification lines of travel in recognition of time sequence. Adios.